Richard, I love arguments about God, why God may exist, why God may not exist, disputations between theists and atheists. Many people, though, tell me that if I'm to take this seriously, not just as an enjoyable intellectual exercise, that arguments not only won't get me there, but may even inhibit the process of me really connecting to an ultimate reality. Some have called arguments surprisingly unhelpful. Others have said arguments will actually distort one's way of thinking.
Well, I think people believe that there is a God, believe in God, for different reasons. Some people have very deep religious experiences, and it's always rational to believe that things are as they seem to be in the absence of counter-evidence. So if you have a deep awareness of God, then you should believe indeed that you are in contact with God, unless somebody can produce an objection. Other people believe in God on the basis of testimony. That is, someone they trust tells them there is a God, and they think that someone knows everything and is reliable. And clearly in some obscure village in the Middle Ages, the only source of information was the priest, and if the priest told them there was a God, then they believed there was a God, and that was perfectly rational because they were depending on the only source they could see that was a source of knowledge. And these are perfectly proper procedures for getting to God in the absence of counter-evidence. But in the modern world, there's a lot of counter-evidence about. There are a lot of people giving arguments against the existence of God, saying religious experience is delusory and priests aren't good sources of information. And so in a situation where the matter is controversial, one needs arguments. And it's always been part of the Christian religious tradition, certainly, that there are these arguments available for those who want it. Not that everybody needs arguments, but there are available for those who need it. You get that in the Jewish, in the Hebrew Bible too, in the book of the Wisdom of Solomon. You get St. Paul in his letter to the Romans saying that the pagans are without excuse for not worshipping God because the visible world makes it evident that there is a God. That is to say, Paul says, that the world is reason for believing there is a God. In other words, public evidence is reason for being a God. And throughout the Christian tradition, at any rate until the year 1800, most theologians said there are these arguments. If you're a sophisticated guy and want arguments, then there are arguments. That is the religious tradition, this religious tradition. And I think, though I'm not an expert on other religious traditions, it's pretty Islam, I think, is happy with this. And to the extent that Judaism has creedal beliefs, I think it is happy with this. So there's a basic religious tradition in favor of arguments for those who need it. Not that everybody needs it, but for those who need it. And of course, if the purpose of an argument is not just to establish a certain truth, but to use it, and the purpose of arguments to the existence of God is to ultimately be arguments to the existence of a particular God who can be accessed in particular ways and who has told you to do particular things. And once again, in the Christian tradition, these arguments are meant to show that there is a God who has become incarnate, and in Jesus, who founded a church, and there are certain ways that we ought to live and certain ways that we ought to pray, and that these will help us to get to God, to make personal contact with the God whom arguments had shown that he exists. And I would think that other religious traditions who believe in that, in a personal God, would say the same. The purpose of arguments is only to show you that there is a certain sort of God, and they provide ways of access to him.
Don't we have a danger in arguments in the sense that there can be more general features of arguments in an approach to a specific kind of God? So if you're not careful, somebody would look at this whole flow of arguments, and in fact, the more general arguments may have higher validity than the more specific ones. So that if you start with arguments inferring from the world to a general sense of some transcendent value, but then take that immediately to a specific kind of God in the Christian religion, that's conflating something that is very different.
Well, it's more specific, yes. Well, any argument to a more specific matter is, it is always more probable if one proposition entails another proposition, then it is always more probable that the second proposition is true than that the first proposition is true. That is to say, it's more likely that there is furniture in this room than that there are a number of cameras in this room. But that's no reason for supposing that there aren't a number of cameras in that room, so long as the evidence is fairly strong to that purpose. And likewise with your example, yes, of course, the claim that there is some ultimate reality is more likely to be true than the claim that there is a personal God.
Which is more likely to be true than that personal God is the Christian God.
The Christian God.
On and on.
That is true, but it is true of any argument to anything. And if you were only content with the most general results of arguments, all you would want to say, for example, in science is, well, some scientific theory may be true. But of course, scientists don't say that. They say quantum theory is true. They go for the more specific if the more specific is sufficiently probable. And I think in this case, the existence of a personal God is sufficiently probable.
The question is not what I would like, but the question is what the argument can justifiably support.
Indeed.
I like a lot of things that are not
yes,
true.
Sure. But my claim is that the argument can justifiably support the narrower conclusion in this case. My claim is that there are good arguments for the existence of a personal God. These arguments are arguments from the most general phenomena of the world, that there is a universe, that it is governed by regular laws. These laws are such as to lead to the evolution of humans. These very specific things are very good things, things that a personal creator would have reason to bring about, and there's no reason to suppose they would occur otherwise. So that is a good argument for a personal God.